And we do our own focus on those issues now with Myron Brilliant, Senior Vice President for International Affairs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Thea Lee, Deputy Chief of Staff at the AFL-CIO, and Yukon Wong is a Senior Associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and previously oversaw the World Bank's program for China. Myron Brilliant, to start with you. Yesterday, President Obama said, "I absolutely believe China's peaceful rise is a good for the world and good for America." Is its economic rise good for America?
I think it is good for America. We're talking about the second largest economy in the world, soon to be the largest economy 10, 15 years from now. So it's very important that we participate in its market, that American companies are able to compete and prosper in China. And I believe that, we've seen tremendous economic growth in this relationship. Since 2000, well over 300% increase in exports to that market. So there is an enormous promise for our farmers, for our manufacturers, for our service providers. More needs to be done, but it's a good market, and it's important that we continue to engage it.
All right, Thea Lee, so starting off with opportunities here, but what's the key problem that you see right now in the relationship?
Well, the Chinese economy is enormously important to the United States, and it has enormous potential. But unfortunately, right now, there are a lot of trade frictions because the Chinese government is not playing by the rules, whether it's respect to currency manipulation, egregious violation of workers' rights, or illegal subsidies. And so we can't have a healthy and sustainable trade relationship with a country that doesn't play by the rules. Right now, we have a more than $250 billion trade deficit with China. That's because we're importing so much more products than we are able to export. We need to figure out how to get that relationship on a more balanced footing, and we need to figure out how to get the Chinese government to comply with the international obligations it has already agreed to.
And Yukon Wong, the Chinese came here saying they've made some adjustments on the currency. They came touting some recent business deals. What's the Chinese perspective on these tensions that get so much attention here?
Well, the world sees a China rising, next superpower. The China looking forward actually sees a country which is mired in what I call low-cost, labor-intensive production processes, commensurate with the economy which has a per capita income of less than $4,000, one-tenth of that of the United States. And when they look forward, they say we have to move up the value chain. We have to move to higher value technology product lines.
And therefore?
Therefore, what they're really keen on doing is acquiring technology. And therefore, you have this controversy over indigenous innovation, the rules of the game. In some cases, it's actually very gray, not transparent. Similar practices exist in every country, both in Europe, U.S., as well as in China. And I also agree with Thea, this question of transparency and how you define this is a key issue for everybody in the coming years.
So Myron Brilliant, you start off by talking about the opportunities here, but a lot of your companies are having all kinds of problems.
Well, it may be funny for your viewers to realize that Thea Lee and I agree on a lot. We agree that we do have regulatory issues.
And we don't see that all that often on this program.
Well,
right?
on this issue, we share some common views. One, we do have concerns about China's intellectual property record. We also want to see China's currency appreciate. We think that would help our trading relationship. But also, as importantly, we have a range of regulatory issues in that market. We want to see how China will develop a level playing field that allows our companies to invest and export to that market. So we have some challenges in that market. We should not skirt over the differences. I was pleased that President Obama raised those issues. Now we need to see how China responds.
All right, but make it concrete. I mean, can you give us an example of a particular, how the problem works itself out for a company?
Well, there are a number of problems. One that has gotten a lot of attention is how China developed an indigenous innovation policy that basically cut our IT companies and advanced manufacturing companies potentially out of the procurement market. Now, the two sides have worked on that. There was progress made between the two presidents, and hopefully we've addressed that. But they basically were saying if we didn't register our IP in that market, we would not be able to compete for procurement contracts, both at the central government level and at the provincial level. Hundreds of billions of dollars at stake. So this is an area we made some progress on this visit. Now we'll see how it's implemented by the Chinese government.
And Thea Lee, do you see movement on the Chinese side? Yukon Wong was talking about their perspective of what they're trying to do to grow their economy. So they've clearly got their issues as well. Do you see them moving in the right direction on some of these areas?
I think the movement has been way too slow on the part of the Chinese government on all the areas that I talked about, certainly, whether it's currency. If you have a 40% imbalance in the currency and you make a 0.5% appreciation, that's just buying time. That's not solving the problem. And meanwhile, as they slow walk the solutions to those problems, we're losing jobs. Now, American companies are more patient because they're making money in China, but American workers are losing their jobs, and we have a crisis situation right now. The same thing with workers' rights. There has been some very, very slow progress, but this is an enormously important country for us, and yet Chinese workers lack basic human rights. They can't form an independent union. They cannot bargain collectively with their employer over wages or working conditions, and the Chinese government doesn't enforce any of its labor laws effectively, whether it's minimum wage, maximum hours, health and safety, or protections against child labor or slave labor. And so we have some real serious problems, and the progress is way too slow in my view.
Of course, Yukon Wong, it's pointed out on this program, and the Chinese pointed out that the U.S. has its own imbalances, right?
Right.
That spending beyond our means, for example, leading to this trade imbalance.
Well, let me speak about the trade imbalance. China's trade surplus 5 years ago was 8% of GDP. This year that was just finished, it fell to 3%. My guess is that by the end of the next year or two, it's going to be 1 or 2. It's going to become insignificant. It's actually going to be below the guideline that Secretary Geithner established. So I don't actually think the trade issue is a serious issue.
It's moving in the right way.
Direction, and nor is the exchange rate really the issue. There is a real issue in terms of about jobs. And what's ironic, of course, is both the U.S. general public and the Chinese general public share the same general question. We need more jobs, higher paying jobs. How do we get at it? Now, the unfortunate issue is that U.S. is the most innovative, high-technology country in the world. China is, in fact, producing only a range of low-technology jobs. And for China, the real issue is how do I actually move up the value chain? And there are very few examples of successful countries that have done this. There's actually only one, and that is Korea. And if you look at Korea very closely, you see that Korea did this through indigenous innovation. So China's actually copying a model of another country, the only one they've been able to find. And the question is this consistent with the rules of the game?
Well, if Myron Brilliant, everybody's saying that we need to be more proactive or watch the rules of the game here. What specifically should the Obama administration do? How hard do they push? Do we start to set our own barriers, for example?
Well, no, I don't think the answer is to erect protectionist barriers. One, we need to ensure we have our competitiveness agenda in place. That's investing in education. It's making sure we have a robust trade agenda, passing free trade agreements. It's making sure that we invest in infrastructure and R&D. So one part of the solution is that we work domestically to have the right policies in place. With respect to China in particular, I think we need to continue to press the Chinese in these dialogues that if they are going to be a global economic power, it comes with rights and responsibilities. They need to participate in the international rules, and they need to ensure that if they want to be able to compete in our market and other markets around the world, that they have to have a level playing field for our goods and services. And right now, it's not a level playing field, and we need to address that.
Well, Thea Lee, press how hard is the question. How would you fight? How would you fight this battle?
Well, I would press beyond strategic dialogues and unending state visits where nothing actually gets done. I think the United States needs to bring some cases at the World Trade Organization, bring more cases than we have, particularly on the issue of currency manipulation and workers' rights violation, because these are areas where the Chinese government is gaining an enormous unfair competitive advantage over American producers and American workers, and our government is doing too little to challenge them. And I agree with some of what Myron said. I think the United States needs its own coherent national economic strategy with respect to infrastructure and education. Unfortunately, we see everybody in the United States obsessed right now with cutting state budgets and cutting funds for education and for infrastructure, and that is the wrong direction. China's not cutting the funds it's spending on infrastructure and education, and the United States shouldn't be either. But we need to press a whole lot harder than we have, and we need to come out with more concrete results than we did from this last summit.
Time for a quick response.
Just 3 reactions to what Thea said. First of all, there are areas where we should be looking at multilateral, not unilateral or bilateral approaches to dealing with issues. Economic rebalancing is one of them. Second, when we're dealing with summits, we actually do get results out of these deals. I will tell you that indigenous innovation would not have been resolved without the visit of President Hu Jintao. We would not have $45 billion worth of contracts without Hu Jintao's visit. So the visits are important, and they do create jobs here in the U.S. And third, we're not opposed to using enforcement tools that the United States has. That's the last resort. That's not the first step in dealing with China. We need to engage China.
All right, we have to leave it there. Thea Lee, Myron Brilliant, and Yukon Wong. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.